Hey guys, what it do? It's your boy Supreme Chiha the God. Welcome to our very first ever video essay. Let's get right into it. Now, why is Webtoon not as successful as mangas and comic books? Even though line Webtoon and Lensin have made it far more accessible than most mangas and comic books to read, like fans can easily read Webtoons. This is something that I always wanted to tackle, and shout out to Scry for commenting this. Now, this comment inspired me to just sit down, tucker in, and write a short essay on what I've discovered to be some of the biggest flaws with Webtoons. Now, this might be a part one of a series that I might continue to do, but we're gonna see how you guys react below, depending on how many likes we get, how many views we get, and all that stuff, because it does take hella effort and hella time. Now, firstly, I want to acknowledge that Webtoons currently have some of the most interesting and ambitious stories that are a great addition to the fictional genre with the type of stories they offer. However, a lot of the very hyped stories that have these major flaws that, to me, seemingly is preventing them from succeeding critically to the same level as legendary and current mangas and comic books. When you look at a story like Vinland Saga, well, maybe not comic books, they kind of trash now, but legendary comic books. When you look at a story like Vinland Saga and how hyper-focused the narrative and character arcs are, how the story keeps you on your toes and makes you question things and even root for someone that you know you shouldn't, or how Under the Red Hood makes you question Bruce Wayne and Batman's moral compass and the state of mind of somebody like Jason Todd, who was murdered by the Joker. And you ask, why doesn't he just bloody kill the Joker? We see and understand Jason's rage, and this story and other stories like this, like Vinland Saga or Akira, are so powerful because of how hyper-focused they are. If we look at something like Attack on Titan, where the story can have massive scopes and often focuses on many characters, where we see the world initially through a narrow lens, so that when the world expands we begin to question which side is right, which side is wrong, as the lines between good and bad begin to blur. The narrative focus stays sharp and consistent throughout. Every character showcase adds value to this narrative despite fluctuating themes. The almighty One Piece has lasted for over 800 episodes on air for a reason. Naruto, despite its frantic ending segments, managed to convert a whole generation of kids that are now anime and manga heads through this. Despite all the tumultuous filler, how and why? Why can I forgive Naruto for all of its flaws and yet be furious at Nobless for a finale that simply felt dragged out? Nobless stayed pretty focused throughout the tours, right? Why then can I not even nearly begin to rank it near my top 10? Well, this is why I believe I've discovered a few major flaws in Webtoons, and why none, thus far in my opinion, minus One Punch Man and Mob Psycho, which are technically webcomics but they're part of the same ilk, have reached the levels that they ought to. Firstly, I believe it is how Webtoons are monetized. Webtoons are something you pay for if you want to go to be ahead of those that refuse to or cannot afford to pay for new chapters. We already know this is a very impatient generation. Ain't nobody got time to wait. But when you do begin to pay, you quickly begin to realize that a lot of the chapters don't fulfill anything on their own. You begin to see that many of these chapters are better read in chunks of 5 to 10 chapters in order to get any narrative satisfaction. A whole chapter can be set up for the next chapter, feeling like an unnecessary addition that destabilizes the pacing of the story and brings it to a crawl unless you're reading many chapters at a time. An arc that seems meaningless in the grand scheme of things can last for over 30, 50 chapters without any real payoff. A scenario teased to be near can be 100 plus chapters away. A story thread at the beginning of a story can be forgotten for hundreds of chapters, and without constant rereading, one can easily forget that it was once a plot line in the first place. But these fluff chapters are necessary for the authors to gain more compensation. And I'm not saying that this is the reason why they do it, but it may certainly have an influence. Think of it this way, right? I can reach the next arc in 15 chapters. But if I fluff every second chapter, that means I provide an extra useless 15 chapters, but that's extra purchases for 15 more chapters, doubling my potential income for that arc. Now, for my next non-monetary point, I'm going to use Tower of God, lookism, and unordinary as the main examples for some of the downfalls of Webtoons that I believe are holding it back. Now, I believe that Tower of God had the absolute and technically may still have the absolute highest potential to be the very first webtoon story that reaches legendary status. of being considered one of the greatest fictional pieces in the comic region. But nearly 500 chapters in, the story has not yet reached its potential. For example, Attack on Titan has less than 200 chapters and the story is almost fully complete. With fully fleshed out characters, fully fleshed out narratives, fully fleshed out teams, fully fleshed out so many, like, it's a whole world built in all in less than 200 chapters. Naruto, with a massive world and so many potential and interesting side stories, some told and others obviously ignored, finished its story at 700 chapters. Tower of God does not even seem halfway done and we are 500 chapters in almost, perhaps taking the One Piece route. However, unlike One Piece, the center of attention in Tower of God is Bam. And this is not the only problem. Bam is not the only character like this. If you look at, I think, high school, does this story High School Girls, I believe, my apologies, Girls of the Wilds, no characters are very bland. The main protagonist is super bland, which is okay. I understand it. But, well, despite Bam being a great character, he pales in comparison to someone like Luffy or Kaneda from Akira and simply does not have the personality for the story to be told through his perspective. For example, within the first 40 to 60 chapters, Bam realizes that in order for him and his friends to get what they want, others need to die or fall in their place. 100 chapters later, Bam realizes that some people might have to die for him and his friends to achieve their goals. 100 chapters after that, or 50 chapters after that, Bam realizes that others have to... You get the point. His character grows, yes, but simultaneously seems to be the same naive kid that first came into the tower to find Rachel. To put it simply, his conviction and drive are fairly dull in comparison to some of the other characters within the tower. Bam is a special child of prophecy, the most cliche thing in history. But guess whose prophecy it is? It's his own goddamn mother's prophecy. He's essentially Harry from the Potter series with a far more convoluted story. But that's okay, because his supporting cast can make the story far more interesting, and often do, until they are sidelined or forgotten for far too many chapters. Interesting characters like Leroy and Rack have little to no development in over 500 chapters, or nearly 500 chapters. The only thing we learn about Rack is that he's from a line of ancient beings who roam the tower. Then we have spectacular and interesting characters like Karaka or I cannot pronounce that, but you know who I'm talking about. Phantomonium, whatever, her or him, whom we know very little about. Potential side stories worthy of being told, but at the current pace, it's looking like another 500 chapters before we learn anything meaningful about these characters, minus a few teasers here and there. A similar problem is seen in Lookism, where we're almost 300 chapters in, and one of the most interesting questions about the story, or within the story about his body, is often forgotten for hundreds of chapters, but teased to oblivion occasionally. And finally, it's like a side mainish arc in the story. In Unordinary, the far more interesting and all-encompassing story of Ember and Sarah's powers is a subplot line behind John being a bad person, an arc that could have and should have been solved 60 chapters ago, and yet it is continuing 120 chapters later. Oh, look what John just did, guys. He's definitely a bad guy. You would think that we as readers would have the capacity to know that John has been a prick for over 100 chapters, but surprise, surprise, a lot of the readers actually needed 120 plus chapters before they believed that John is being a prick. Hopefully, now the author will say, hey, maybe it's time for me to continue to the more important part of the story. You know what I'm saying? Like the story, the arc about an organization murdering heroes, you know, and perhaps another one taking people's powers, or maybe not. You see, unlike most authors, you know, who tend to be quite separated from the fans and essentially only see professional critics review the work and offering real tangible solutions, webtoon authors only essentially see their fans. If the most liked comment is defending John, for example, a character the author has been trying very hard to make dislikable and a villain, the author is probably thinking, damn, maybe I haven't showed him being bad enough. Maybe I need to push extra hard so that the audience understands what I'm trying to do with him. But you see, the problem with the vocal fans has always been that a lot of times they just be chatting. A lot of times they read only the surface level of what the story provides, and seeing them receiving all the likes from like-minded people may possibly add to the problem that we see, where the author continues to drag a narrative in hopes that people will finally understand what the fuck the author's trying to do. But you see, fans should never be spoon-fed. A good story is understood eventually, and those that don't understand it don't need to. Not everyone gets why One Piece or Attack on Titan, or the best example of a great webcomic, Mob Psycho, is so good. But you see, the author doesn't care. He just wants to tell, well, I'm saying the reason why those stories are the way they are is because the author doesn't care. He just wants to tell his story, or their story. And that disconnect between them and the fans may have an influence to why the non-webtoon authors rarely suffer from the overextended arcs and underdeveloped character trope that a lot of webtoons seem to be suffering from. The narrative focus is lacking in webtoons a lot of times. The stories often have far too much going on, and even when there are more pressing, intriguing plots, they are completely ignored. The fan base feels robbed because why are we focusing on this useless arc that's not really going to provide us with anything, while there's this massive massive arc that's right there, it's looming right there, but we're ignoring it. For example, why do we care about John being a prick when people are literally dying? Why do we care about 47 extra subplots when Daniel has a whole ass overpowered body gifted to him for no reason? Why do we care about Bam's angst PTSD induced love for his captor when Anak's arc has barely begun, has barely been touched, when Wangnan and Karaka, who have this amazingly interesting connection with the main antagonist, those arc is completely being ignored, when Rachel, who just received some OP powers potentially, is there? Why? Oh, why? Why did you introduce us to so many characters just to ignore them for hundreds of chapters with no development and expect us to care when they suddenly reappear 300 chapters later with no extra development? Alas, for now, I'm tired and done for now. I'll make a part 2 eventually. But these are just some of the complaints I have about webtoons and why I think they are not yet at the level they ought to be. Now, admittedly, there are thousands, hundreds of horrible mangas, of horrible comic books. But there are always great ones. Every few years, there are always phenomenal, fantastic pieces. And it's been a while, and there's still no fantastical piece of webtoon that I can say this is top 10 worthy. And this is critically. This is not favoritism. This is not my personal opinion in terms of top 10. There's no webtoon I can put above a top 10 manga currently. But there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of interesting types of stories being told. Solo Leveling suffers from a similar fate, where it's essentially, the story is essentially a one-man show. There's no real connection with you and any other character, and it becomes kind of boring. That's just my opinion. It's been your boy Supremacy the God. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'm out. Oh, leave. I know some people gonna have some thoughts, so yeah, comment below, man. Let's have discussions. Part 2 will eventually come out. Well, hopefully I'll answer some of your questions. I kind of got tired of writing after a while, so I stopped. I'm out.